So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to factor out our vendor scripts from our main scripts so that we only need to have the client in production download jQuery and Lodash and jQuery UI and all that stuff one time, and so that their browser can cache it as you're moving through the application. Now, this won't be as important if you're developing a single page application, but if you have a more traditional application, it will be. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is add a vendor property to my prod, my script's prod object. So it's going to be vendor, and I'm going to pass in the modules I want to factor out, which is going to be jQuery, jQuery UI, and Lodash. Of course, you could also put in module names here that that you might have made yourself, like utility functions that you want on every single page. But anyway, so now that we have that, the first step is, how do we exclude vendor? Well, the answer to that is inside my RequireJS optimize. I'm going to go ahead and instead of passing this object in, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new object, and I'm going to say main config file is main config file, but then I'm going to say exclude config scripts prod vendor. I could also factor this out if I wanted to. I could just cut this, come up here and say const prod config equals blah. And then instead of doing config scripts prod all the time, I can just go and do that. So either way is fine. This kind of reduces the amount of code we have to write though. So now if I come in here and write gulp prod scripts, I'll get the same behavior as before. I'll go ahead and pause while this is doing its thing. But if I go into public build and about, notice that I no longer have Lodash added to this bundle. And same with application. Application only has my application code. It does not have Lodash or jQuery or any of that stuff. So that's the first step. But now, how do we create a vendor bundle? Well, the way I'm going to do this is I'm first of all going to change up my Gulp scripts task a little bit. I'm going to, after we do a Gulp series on dev scripts, I'm going to do a Gulp parallel. And Gulp parallel is going to contain my bundle function. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste that out. And it's also going to contain a vendor bundle. And then I'm going to add a comma there. Remember to add the comma. I'll change this name to modules bundle. Okay, so we need to go ahead and run the optimizer again inside of our vendor bundle, but we unfortunately need to have a file stream going in order to pipe it into RequireJS optimize. I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to cheat here just so I can show you guys a neat trick that you can do with the jQuery or the RequireJS optimizer. But the cheat I'm going to do is I want to open up a file stream to a particular file, right? And so because I need to stream open, I could go ahead and there's a couple of Gulp plugins that will allow me to go ahead and create a file stream, a vinyl FS file stream that I can then pipe into RequireJS optimize with as an empty file. But I'm going to cheat here, and I'm just going to open up source and scripts, and I'm going to add a new file called Vendor.js, and I'm going to say left blank as a comment up there. So we're going to pipe Vendor.js into our optimizer, which right now it's empty, but you'll see in a second, I can force RequireJS to add modules in. Then I'm going to open up Gulp.js, and I'm going to say, first of all, I'll say const prod config equals config scripts prod. And then I'm going to say return gulp.source, passing in our source scripts vendor.js. And then I'm going to pipe that into our RequireJS optimize. I'll do that in a second. And then I'm going to pipe this into gulp dest, which is going to be our prod config.dest. Now for this, I'm going to pipe this into RequireJS optimize, and I'm going to pass in an object. Also, this J is lowercase, not uppercase. Make sure you get that right, otherwise it won't work. And I'm going to do the same thing before. I'm going to say main config file equals this, but then I'm also, instead of saying exclude prod config vendor, I'm going to say include prod config vendor. This has the opposite effect, where instead of excluding a set of modules, it'll force them to be included, even though the vendor.js file is empty. However, if we run this, we should get an error. And we get an error. Now, the error is no such file or directory, modules RequireJS, source lib jQuery dist jQuery.js. What is going on here? Well, what's going on here is my base URL is being set for public. So when it's searching for this, remember we've configured our jQuery in our config.js, we configure jQuery to go back one directory, then open up lib jQuery dist jQuery. And we've configured our base URL to be /scripts. So unfortunately, it is looking for that jQuery file right in the root of the source directory. So it's in scripts, it then backs out into lib, and then it goes forward relative to that, that vendor.js file, which isn't what we want. What we want is we want this to be relative to our public directory, our public lib directory, so that we can pull in modules that are included by Bower. So to do that, we can jump back into our Gulp file and actually change the base URL of where we'll be centered on to /public scripts. And then we can come back here and we can run this. So you could also override the base URL to do a build from something that isn't in public. Like, let's say the way you wanted to do a production build is you wanted to go out, have Babel compile all of your JavaScript files, and then dump those JavaScript files into a temporary build directory, and then have RequireJS act on those temporary files. But then with the base URL, you can then point it back into Bower so that it can pick up all your Bower dependencies as well. But we didn't do that here. We were kind of lazy and just we're just building our dev scripts as normal right into our public directory, then building our bundle based off of what's in there. Either way is fine. I would probably prefer the temporary build directory myself, but you guys, that could be left up as an exercise to you guys. Anyway, so now that we've ran that, what do we get? If we open up public build, our application.js is still just our application code. But if I come in here and refresh, we now have this _vendor.js file. Now we have a problem, and the problem is we're building our vendor.js file twice. So we're building it once, and then adding in the additional vendor modules, but then we're building it again because of that glob we have in our Gulp file. Remember the source glob? This source glob is going to pick up source scripts vendor. Again, the reason why we're using this _vendor.js is kind of a cheat to really easily create a vinyl file stream so that we can pipe it into RequireJS Optimize. Again, you could use vinyl source stream to achieve the same effect. But what we need to do to fix this problem is to remove vendor.js from this glob. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to add in an exclusion pattern. So an exclusion pattern starts with a exclamation point. I'm going to say exclude anything in public scripts that starts with _.js. Because remember, our vendor.js file got copied over here. So we can go ahead and do that, and then go ahead and run this again. It's getting kind of messy with us. There's some contention about where our files are going, and that's because we're running everything through Babel first. So again, you could certainly make this a little bit more complex to reduce some of the file name contention we have going on, reduce the extraneous files that we have being copied into our scripts folder. But again, you guys can do that on your own. This is just a quick and dirty way to implement this. You can use what you've learned in this series to put together a little bit of a better pipeline. You'll see in the future, though, that other module loaders don't suffer from the same problem. All right, so now if we come in here, we're still getting that error. So we want to go ahead and add nothing because I just completely messed that up. It was supposed to be underscore followed by the wildcard followed by JS, and that was completely my bad. Sorry about that. Okay, so now if we run this again, I'll go ahead and pause the video. We will see that the vendor file is no longer being processed twice because we no longer we excluded that from our source. You could have also done something else. You could have also excluded this from our dev scripts. You could have put the fake vendor file into another folder. You could have done anything like this. I kind of like doing it like this, ignoring things with underscores, because I've also, in some circumstances, I also will put things like the configuration file in _config in my source and have the configuration file be processed as well. But that's a little bit more complicated because we have to disable modules for that because we don't want it to turn into a module. Stuff and things, the point is we now have our vendor.js, which includes jQuery, jQuery UI, and underscore. So now if we were to jump over to index.html, we're using our prod here, and if I went here and I ran this, you'll notice we get an error. there's no Lodash, no jQuery, and no jQuery UI. So what's going on? Well, we need to include that vendor bundle as well. So if we come over here, in addition to build application, we include build vendor. Now coming back here and hitting refresh, we now see that we grab require, vendor, and application. And it loads. So that is a way to go ahead and optimize your application a little bit further if you're not writing an SPA. So you can go ahead and just add this code to the bottom of all your files, all of your views that loads in the appropriate module for the current page. You could refactor this out into a helper function or something like that if you're writing in PHP or Razor or something like that. And of course, you'll want to have the switch to detect if you're in production or development. When you're in development, always load in the stuff manually and don't worry about that optimization build, because that optimization build takes a good while, as you've seen in these last 2 videos, to finish. So that's only appropriate for production. But anyway, that wraps up Require. So pros of Require. Require is simple. It is mature. It has decent documentation. If you're trying to do something with Require, you can go ahead and Google it, and I guarantee you there'll be a Stack Overflow question asking exactly what you need to know. Cons, it lacks features and can be a little squirrely to build your production pipeline out of. Now, another con of it is we won't be able to natively load in Node modules, which you'll see is actually a huge benefit. But for now, we're using Bower, and we're pulling into our lib folder because everything has to be publicly accessible. So in a production build, of course, you would not publish your lib folder or your scripts folder. You just publish your build folder. But as far as publishing all that stuff, that's up to you guys and how you want to do that task. So I think this wraps up Require. In the next couple of videos, we're going to take a look at Browsify, which I personally really like Browsify. It allows us to load in Node modules and is a bit more recent and is a bit more fully featured. So we'll see you guys in the next video.